Right. Hello to anybody who is out there and can hear me. Okay, see who we've got. Okay. Right. Well, I hope somebody is out there and can hear me. I'm not sure if anybody is online yet. I will just wait. Aha, I think I have one viewer at this stage, one person online. Do feel free to send me a chat message if you can, just so that I know that you are online. I think the chat button is in the top right of your screen, maybe the top left, but top corner of your screen. Do feel free to send me a chat. I think there's now a couple of people online. I think there's about half a dozen people who've registered for today's webinar. So hopefully you, hello, Kath Gorman, who's just sent me a message. There is a 30 or 40-second time delay between me speaking and you hearing, so just need to bear that in mind. I think both I need to bear that in mind, as well as you need to bear that in mind. Hi, Amelia. Happy New Year to you too. Yes, indeed. It's a new year. New excitement, new EU opportunities. Well, same old EU opportunities, but different different perspectives in 2015. Okay, so there's at least, and Gemma's online. Gemma, hello. Great, it all seems to be working. This is fantastic. So I've got 3 people online. I'll just give it, it's just gone 1 o'clock. I'll give it another couple of minutes just to make sure. Now, I hope that you will have by now received the text of today's webinar. I'm really sorry, there was a glitch, clearly. It was supposed to be sent to you first thing this morning, but for some reason it didn't go out first thing this morning. I only discovered this half an hour ago. So I did send everybody the text for today's webinar about half an hour ago. Hopefully you've received that and had a chance to print it out. If not, don't worry, you can refer to it after the webinar is over. And if you haven't received it, I can always send it again. But hopefully it will have arrived by now for most people, if not everybody, with a bit of luck. Okay. So I'm just going to wait another moment or so just to see if anybody else has logged on. And Yorgos is here. Hello, Yorgos. Our webinars are proving popular outside the UK as well as inside the UK. I think we have people from the Netherlands and Greece today, which is great. So that's terrific. Okay, well, I think we might start. I think we've got most people who are here now. Hopefully everybody is online. Just to repeat that I hope that you will have received the printout for today's webinar. I'm sorry that there was a glitch this morning and it didn't go out when it should have gone out first thing. If you haven't had time to print it out, then obviously you can print it out after the webinar is over. Okay, so what's going to happen is that I'm now going to switch to the PowerPoint presentation. you are able to send questions to me via the chat button. So that's the way of checking messages. Now, unfortunately, when I start the webinar presentation with the PowerPoint slides, I won't actually be able to see the chat buttons. So I will stop every so often and go back to make sure that I'm keeping track of any questions or any problems or issues that you might be having. If it all suddenly goes blank and you have to try and log on, that should be okay for you. But if there's any problems, I may be able to arrange for you to see the remainder of the webinar online. There may be, hopefully there'll be a recording of this, which we keep for a very short period of time, because obviously it goes out of date. But if there is a problem during the course of the webinar, then don't panic. We should be able to let you see the rest of it if there's any problem. Okay, right, well, I'm now going to start. I'm going to go to the first PowerPoint slide, which is this one here, which just says what we are. So this webinar, which goes for 90 minutes, there'll be a short pause in the middle. This is the overview of the opportunities for arts, culture, heritage, and the creative industries. Okay, so what we're going to do is a very brief look at some of the background issues that might be useful for you to be aware of. A quick look at the structural funds and the Interreg programs. A look at the external actions, very brief look at the external actions. Then we'll have the short break, and then after the break, we'll look at the transnational funds. It's important to say this is only a 90-minute webinar, so obviously you'll get a broad overview of the various EU funding opportunities, but we don't have time to go into detail about any of them, really. That's why we run the additional webinars about the individual programs. So this is purely a summary. Okay, I think I've done this. I've explained to you the chat button. The chat button is the only button that I'm really going to use, so I hope that will be okay with everybody. If you want to send a question, as I said, just use your chat button, and then I will respond to that question. Every so often, every 5 or 10 slides, I will check the chat button to see what people have sent to me, if anything. Okay, a little bit of background. So I'm going to go straight into the background. Actually, before I go into the background, I'm just going to go back and quickly check to make sure that everybody is still with me and that we haven't got any problems about people viewing everything. No, everybody seems to be okay. Everybody seems to be online. No one has sent me a crisis button, so that's fine. We shall go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so the treaty and the mission statement. It's just important to be aware of these two overarching documents that underpin the way in which the European Union functions and the way in which it provides resources for arts, culture, heritage, and creative industries. The treaty is the Article 167, which enshrines the responsibilities of the European Commission in the areas of culture and so on. It took 40 years for them to put anything into the treaties about culture, so it wasn't exactly a priority. But we finally have this article, which focuses on the flowering of the cultures of the member states, respecting national and regional diversity. I mean, obviously, the European Commission can't tread on the toes of the individual member states in terms of the way in which it provides funding for anything, really, including arts and culture. So here they stress that point, that this has to be about the cultures of the member states, national and regional diversity. But it also makes this point that one of the sort of threads that underpins the way in which the European Union is able to contribute is the recognition that there is some sort of common cultural heritage across Europe that binds us together across the different member state borders and boundaries. And once upon a time, there was a definition of common cultural heritage, which was all the sort of classical things that you might imagine about medieval architecture and the works of people like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and so on and so forth. These days, there's no real definition, and I think that this is quite an opportunity because the European Union is open to projects which might, use some sort of new definition. What does common cultural heritage mean in Europe in the 21st century? I think that's a very interesting question that's been brought into obvious highlight because of all the events, the terrible events in Paris in the last week. What does all those events say about how we perceive a common cultural heritage in Europe? How is the traditional cultural heritage or perspectives on cultural heritage changing as a result of a migration into Europe from a whole range of diverse cultural communities. I think it's a really interesting issue, and I'm sure the European Commission will be interested in projects which explore some of these themes. So I certainly would bear that in mind. Europe 2020 is the other key document. Europe 2020 is the mission statement, and the mission statement changes every 10 years. The treaties are there for much longer, but the mission statement changes every 10 years. This is the current mission statement. These are the overarching goals in the mission statement, and this underpins the actual funding program. So funding programs are either directly linked to these themes in Europe 2020, or in some way the funding programs are asked to reflect these themes as strongly as they possibly can. And I think that's true even of the culture program these days. When we look at some of the themes in the culture program, you'll see that they are starting to talk about some of the themes that are reflected here in the Europe 2020 document. Just a couple of brief things about the practicalities about applying the European Union, how the whole thing works. I'm sure most of you will be aware of this, but just to emphasize it, there are three main institutions in the European Union that govern the way the whole thing functions: the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. The Commission is the bureaucracy which gives away the money, so they're obviously important, and if you are applying to the European Union for funding, you will be dealing with the Commission directly in many cases, sometimes indirectly, because some of the funding is devolved back to the member states. So you may not apply to the Commission directly, but the people you are applying to will be reporting back to the Commission. So the Commission is obviously important. The Parliament represents the people. 785, how many MEPs. They have influence over policy and decision making. They don't give money away, but they have influence over policy. And the Council represents the member states. The Council is essentially a meeting every 6 months of the Council of Ministers. The ministers in each thematic area, so the ministers of transport will meet the ministers of health, the ministers of finance, and the ministers of culture. So they all get together. And at the end of every 6 months, at least once every 6 months, there'll be a full council meeting, which is the heads of state of all the EU member states. There are various other institutions. You don't need to worry too much about those at this point. And just at the bottom there, just a point about the fact that the Commission has now set up a number of separate agencies which now manage the funding programs on a day-to-day basis. So the EACEA, which is the Education, Audiovisual and Culture Executive Agency, commonly known as the agency, they manage the grant programs on behalf of all those areas: education, audiovisual and culture. There are a few programs still managed directly by the Commission, such as the Capitals of Culture and so on. But for the culture program, the media program, and all, Erasmus program, and all those, you apply through the agency if you're submitting applications. There are 28 commissioners who oversee the work of the Commission. They each have their own thematic area. The new Commissioner for Education, Culture, Youth and Sport is Tibor Navracsics from Hungary, a former Deputy Prime Minister. I'll say no more about him. We'll wait to see. So they're all new, these commissioners. They only started at the end of last year. So we're waiting for them to make their mark in one way or another. The other commissioners I've put down on this slide is just to sort of remind you that there are other commissioners in areas where they may not look like they give money to culture, but all these areas here have given money to cultural projects. So the media program, Europe for Citizens program, Horizon 2020, ERDF, the ESF, and so on and so forth. All of those programs have given money to culture, and these are the commissioners who are responsible for the areas under which those programs fall. So just to give you an idea of the breadth of possible sources for European funding for culture. Just making the point that there is a European Parliament Committee for Culture and Education. And you may want to, if people talk about how can I build bridges with the European Union, well, one way is to sort of make contact with the Culture Committee. You can very easily find the Culture Committee by going to that website. You can look for Culture Committee, and you can look for the member state that you happen to be from, and you'll find the names of the MEPs from your country who sit on the Culture Committee. I've included there the name Julie Ward, who's an MEP for the northwest of England for the Labour Party. And I put her down particularly because she is one of the very few people on the Culture Committee who has a background in the arts. Julie Ward has been involved. She's run a theatre company for many years, and that's really good to have. So you may want to make contact with Julie because she's one of the few people on the Culture Committee who does actually have a background and understanding of the arts and culture sector. There are various other committees as well, as I'm sure you will understand. Okay, right. Now, just before we go any further, I'm just going to go back to the check whether or not there are any more questions. We can't see or hear you. We have definitely started. Oh dear. Right, I've just paused for a moment. Right, okay. Please, somebody sent a message saying they can't see or hear me, which is very peculiar. Right, okay. Right, there seems to be a small glitch for some people, so I'm just having a small pause to see whether people can see me or hear me. It seems to be working from... I'm sorry about this glitch, people. I'm just waiting to have confirmation as to whether what's happening here. I'm very sorry about that. Everybody, I'm really, really sorry, but we're just going to have a slight pause while we sort out this problem with one of the delegates. I do apologize. I completely apologize for this. We'll have a slight pause while we sort this out. Right, I think, dear. Okay, we're going to go back now to carry on with the webinar. I do apologize for that slight glitch there. Somebody didn't seem to have the correct information, so I apologize for that. Right, okay, so I'm now talking about the types of funding programs there are. There are essentially three types of funding programs: the structural funds, the transnational funds, and the external actions. The structural funds are the funds that are available to the geographical areas, different geographical areas within the EU, which are lagging behind in terms of economic development, social inclusion, and so on and so forth. The transnational funds are where people are brought together. So the structural funds are generally given to one region, which is lagging behind. The money is spent in that region, whereas the transnational funds are about bringing people together to work on collaborative projects or to take part in mobility activities or whatever. And then there's a third strand, which is the external actions, which are for countries outside the EU member states. Just to put this in perspective, you'll see the 73%, nearly 3/4 of the budget goes on the structural funds, 15% on the transnational, 6% on the external actions, and 6% on the administration costs. So obviously, most of the money in the EU is spent on the structural funds. The total EU budget, just so you can see, is 1% of the GDP of all the member states. So it's quite a modest budget compared to what obviously member states are spending on their government programs. But within that, most of it goes on the structural funds. So I'm now going to go and look at the structural funds in a little bit of detail. The differences between the structural and transnational, they're the two main types of programs. So just to be clear on the differences here, the structural funds have a geographical focus, the transnational have a pan-European focus, as I was explaining earlier. So that means that the structural funds, you don't need partners, except you do for the Interreg program. So for the Interreg program, which does spend money from the structural funds, you do need partners for that. Now, the transnational funds, partners from different countries are essential. So partnerships are absolutely crucial for the transnational funds. The structural funds also have devolved decision-making. That's the principle of structural funds. The money is given back to the member states, and the decisions about how that money is spent is made by the member states. I mean, obviously, the Commission is looking over their shoulder to make sure they're spending it appropriately, but essentially the decisions are made within the member states. Transnational funds, in most cases, you apply wherever you are in Europe, you'll apply to Brussels or to a centralized European institution, which will look at all the grants from all the different European countries. The structural funds have large funds to be accessed, not just because they have 73% of the budget, but also because they can spend money on very large-scale projects. I mean, this is about capital works, infrastructure projects, roads and bridges and buildings and so on, and also a lot of money spent on people-based activities, skills development, capacity building, training, and so on. Whereas the transnational funds, small to medium-sized grants, a range of different projects or exchanges or activities. Okay, so that's the summary of the differences between structural and transnational funds. So I'm going to look at the structural funds first. The structural funds, there are 5 funds within the structural funds, and then there are mechanisms through which the funds are allocated. So there's several different types of funds, and then there are different ways in which those funds are spent. Essentially, there are 2 types of ways in which the money is spent. One through the categories, the different types of economic status. You know, some regions are well off and some are less well off. And then there's the Interreg program, which as I said earlier, involves partnerships. So just to be clear about the funds, there are 5 funds. The Cohesion Fund, that is really a fund available to the countries of Southern Europe. It doesn't apply to the UK and most other Northern European countries, but it does apply if you're in a Mediterranean country. The funds which most people will probably be aware of, particularly the ERDF, the Regional Development Fund, and the ESF, the European Social Fund. The ERDF is mainly focused on the growth and infrastructure, and the ESF is the people-based program. So that spends money on training and skills development and so on. There's also an agricultural fund and a maritime and fisheries fund. And all these funds have given money for cultural projects, providing those cultural projects have made a contribution to that aim at the top there. So if the cultural projects can help reduce regional disparities in terms of income, wealth, and opportunities, then it is possible for those culture projects to receive funding from the structural funds. The way in which the structural funds are allocated, there are 3 different types of categories of EU regions: less developed, transition regions, and then the more developed regions. And you can see there'll be a map in a moment, but that sort of summarizes the different regions. And for those regions, the funds are offered either directly via the various ministries in government or through agencies that the ministries will nominate to actually spend those funds in those particular countries or regions. Then at the bottom, you'll see the European Territorial Cooperation Programme, which is the Interreg programme. And there are a number of different sub-strands for that programme, and each of those sub-strands has its own secretariat. And I'll explain all this in a little bit more detail as we go through. So there's the map of Europe. You'll see the dark red, or the bright red, are the less developed regions. No surprises: Eastern Europe, bits of Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. A couple of areas in the United Kingdom, you'll notice, Cornwall and West Wales. So they are the less developed regions. The darker beige are the transition regions, and then the rest is the more developed regions. There are some websites, web links, where you can get some information about regional policy and the structural funds. DG Regio will have information about ERDF case studies. The DG for Employment and Social Affairs has examples of ESF funding. And the DG for Education, Audiovisual and Culture does have case studies of culture projects funded by these programs as well. And if you're a Connexus member, you can download listings of project examples from the Connexus Culture Info website as well. What can be supported? Well, if you look at the overall documents at the European Commission level, you'll see that ERDF and ESF can be invested in a range of different arts and cultural activities and projects and initiatives, some examples of which are given there. This is a typical example of an ERDF funded project, the conversion of the Waterford Manufacturing Centre. This one was in Ireland, turning it into a visitor centre. So it's going to sort of attract more visitors and tourists to come to the city and spend money and on hotels and restaurants and anything else that's going on. So therefore it's going to help the economic development of that particular country or region. That's a typical ERDF example. This one is a slightly less typical, but still an interesting example. This was the Abertay University in Dundee in Scotland in the United Kingdom, and they got money from the ERDF for their Dare to be Digital program, which is about development of video games. So again, there are opportunities that aren't just related to buildings and infrastructure and so on, and this is one example there. ESF case studies. There are a couple of examples here of funding where money is given to organizations who work with disadvantaged young people to help them become better prepared for employment or to help them try and find jobs. The NEAT abbreviation that's used here, that is a UK abbreviation. It means economic training programs. They obviously are targets to benefit from these sorts of programs. This is one example, and there are plenty of others. Just for the UK benefit, these are the UK regions that are classified in the different areas. As I said, Cornwall and West Wales are the less developed regions. There's a list of the transition regions, and then in the UK, everywhere else is classified as more developed regions, and then the Interreg program operates differently, and I'll explain that in a moment. Again, in the UK, and the same sorts of things will happen in each country. There will be either, if it's a small country, the money will be disseminated via the national ministries. If it's a large country, it will probably follow a similar model to what happens here in the United Kingdom, where the money comes from the European Union to the UK, and it then goes to the various English regions and also to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and then it is spent by those particular bodies and agencies in those nations and regions of the UK. In England, the money now is spent with the coordination or consultation of the LEPs, the Local Enterprise Partnerships. In Scotland, the money is spent by the Scottish Government, and I have to say that it's very difficult to find out exactly how the structural funds are being spent in Scotland at the moment, but we are trying very hard. Wales has an independent agency called the Welsh European Funding Organisation, which spends the money, and there are various agencies in Northern Ireland. These are some other websites which might be helpful if you are in the UK to find a bit more about what's going on. If you do want more information, we will be running some more webinars and information about the structural funds, only for the UK, however, because obviously it's done differently in every country in Europe. So this we just give you the overview here. So the way it works here, in most countries, but this is specifically the United Kingdom, is that there will be a national operational program for each of the funds, the ERDF, the ESF, and the agricultural funds. There will be a national operational program which merges the priorities of the European Union structural funds generally and those of either the UK government or the government of whichever member state is being relevant. And there will be various strategies then developed by each of the devolved agencies. So there's a national operational program strategy, and then there is a strategy by each of the devolved agencies, the LEPs, the Scottish Government, WIFO, and so on. And then applications are made centrally to a managing agency. Most applicants have to provide their own match funding, but there is an opt-in route where there are certain agencies who will provide match funding, and you can work with those agencies to develop projects. It is quite complicated. And I think the best thing I can say, given this is a brief overview webinar, is that if you have specific queries about the structural funds, do send me an email, and then I will try and guide you as to where you will find more information within your own member state or within the agencies here in the United Kingdom. The sad truth, I'm afraid, in the United Kingdom at least, is that in the various operational programs and strategies that have been written so far, the references to creativity, culture, visitor economy, audiovisual, all those words there are extremely low. So it doesn't seem that culture and the creative industries are a priority in the structural funds as much as they have been in the past. But it's early days as yet, so we don't quite know how things are going to work out. But at the moment, things aren't looking good for the arts, culture, and creativity. Finally, on the structural funds, can I just make a point that the agricultural fund does make an allowance for rural regeneration, and so in the various regulations, there's a quotation here which says refers to leisure and cultural services, restoration and upgrading of cultural and natural heritage, and so on and so forth. So there are opportunities from the agricultural programs. There is specifically leader funding, which is a minimum of 5% of the EAFRD, where grants are provided via local action groups, and their priorities can include support for rural tourism, rural services, and cultural and rural heritage. And here is a list of some of the projects funded by the LEADER program in the past, and you'll see a range of relatively small grants given to a range of cultural organizations for these sorts of rural-based projects. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the main structural funds. I'm now going to say something about Interreg, but I'm just going to pop back quickly to see whether anybody has any further questions and to see whether there are any other. Right, okay. Someone has asked me for what does NEAT stand for. I will type that up. So NEAT is not in education, employment, or training. So NEAT stands for not in education, employment, or training. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. And we're going to talk about the Interreg program. So the Interreg program priorities currently include culture. You'll see that culture and tourism and social and cultural infrastructures and so on and so forth, cultural heritage, are all mentioned within the overarching European Union regulations for Interreg. Interreg is a little bit complicated. It's a simple idea. It's the same sorts of economic development goals as the structural funds, but the idea is that rather than working in just your own region, you'll work in partnerships with people in other regions. There are 3 strands. You'll see there A, B, and C. A is cross-border cooperation, B is transnational, and C is Interreg Europe. A and B are the main ones which provide support for projects relevant to the cultural sector. This is the map which shows you the various regions eligible to participate in Strand A. You'll see it's very much focused on the border regions. So you'll see that at the bottom there's the bottom left-hand corner, there's the border between Spain and Portugal in orange. So that means that the regions on either side of the border in Spain and Portugal can collaborate on joint projects. So just to, there are 52 or 53 different substrands in the previous program, which was Strand 4. We're now looking at Strand 5. There'll be a similar area. Just looking at some of these substrands, they all operate on a similar basis. All projects must demonstrate a positive impact on the developments on either side of the border, but they should be developed on a cross-border basis with specific benefits on either side of the borders involved. I mean, for example, here in the UK, you'll see that at the starting from the top, there is a program between Scotland and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There's one between the Republic of Ireland and the west of Wales. There's one between the south of England. In fact, there's 2 between the south of England and northern France, and also between bits of northern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. So there's 2 separate programs there. You'll see that this is an example of the program that's just come to an end, the France Channel program about developing partnerships and so on and so forth. Plenty of examples of culture programs. This is just a small sample of the examples of cultural projects that have been supported here. And one of these Strand A programs, the 2Cs program, has just announced its first call for proposals, and you have to submit your initial concept idea by the 16th of February. So these programs are now starting to ask for calls for proposals. So you can keep your eye out for these, and Strand B, the point I should say, sorry about this, is that each of these different area groupings here, cross-border areas, has their own secretariat. So in order to apply for one of these programs, you apply to the individual secretariat for the particular cross-border area that you're looking at. So, to go back to the overall slide, there will be a cross-border secretariat for the Spain-Portugal. There'll be one for the Spain-France, and so on and so forth. So there are lots and lots of these different secretariats, each managing their own program. Strand B is intra-regional cooperation, and this is about cooperation within a particular regional grouping. So this is not about cross-border, this is working within a particular regional grouping. This is a little bit easier to see on this slide, I think, where you'll see that, for example, the top left-hand corner is Northwest Europe grouping. So this is about anybody anywhere in Ireland or the UK working with northern France, Germany, Luxembourg, all of Belgium, and the southern part of the Netherlands. So that would be, you could cooperate with 2 or 3 partners from those different regions. Then there is, the next one is the North Sea region, which is all the regions around the North Sea, and so on. In the second row, there's the Alpine Space region, East Central Europe, Atlantic coast, Northern periphery, Mediterranean, Southeast Europe, Southwest Europe, Baltic Sea. So depending on where you are, 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of these regional groupings will be relevant to your particular location. In the UK, there are 4 strands relevant to the UK: Northwest, North Sea, Atlantic, and Northern periphery. They all have their own criteria. Here's an example of a project funded by the Northwest Europe group. This was funded, and I thought this was particularly interesting because of this the popcorn horror, where they got funding to develop a smartphone app that connected horror film fans by streaming the best short horror films from around the world. So obviously they're open to imaginative ideas, particularly in the creative industries, in some of these Interreg programs. Strand C of Interreg is Interreg Europe. This doesn't support projects in quite the same way. This supports the sharing of good practice. There are various policy platforms and so on which will be promoting good practice in any one of the particular areas that is of interest to Interreg. So you can't get money in quite the same way, but they're very interesting to find out more about, and to sort of sign up for their newsletters and so on to get examples of good practice from different parts of Europe. These are examples of some of the websites. These are the ones relevant to the UK, but you'll see that the top website in A, B, and C, if you visit that website, you'll get the links to the other Interreg programs in other parts of Europe as well. So I've just listed here the ones relevant to the UK, but if you visit the main websites, you'll get the ones that are relevant to wherever you happen to be in Europe. Okay, that's it. That's for the end of the structural funds. We've done the main structural funds and we've done Interreg. I'm now just going to say a few words about the external actions. The external actions are the programs which cover other parts of the world outside the European Union. There are 3 categories of program here. Actually, I suppose before I move on to these, I should just check once more to see whether there are any questions on the structural funds. Let me just check. No, I think we're all right at this stage. Okay, so I'll go back to. Okay, so there are 3 types of programs here. Countries who are hoping to join the European Union, countries around Europe, other countries around the European Union who are less likely to join at any point, for example, Russia, and then the rest of the world. Now, one key thing, which I think makes the external actions not as relevant as they may have been once, and that is that in many of the transnational programs, they have changed the rules slightly, so it is now much easier to involve a partner country from some other part of the world than it has been in the past. It used to be quite difficult to involve other partner countries from other parts of the world in transnational projects, but it's now much easier. So in many ways, that's probably the easier way to go than to try and develop partnerships through these programs, because these are quite a bit complicated. And these programs certainly aren't if you are just starting out and you think it might be nice to work with a partner in some other country of the world, but you don't really know where to start. Then don't go to these external action programs. These external action programs are really for people who might already have contacts. You came across somebody a few years ago when you were attending an exciting arts festival, and they come from Brazil, and you'd really like to work with them. then this may be an opportunity to develop a project with a Brazilian partner, but it's not for starting from scratch. It's a little complicated because it's covered by several parts of the Commission. There's the DG for enlargement, the DG for the aid programs, and there's the External Action Service, which covers sort of like the foreign affairs departments. One key thing here is a lot of this money is devolved and decisions are made by the European Union office in the other country. The European Union has an office. It's really an embassy, but it's not called an embassy because the European Union is not a country. It's called a delegation or representation, and there's one of these EU delegations in every country of the world. One in the UK, one in London, one in Edinburgh, and there's one in every other country. So, you know, if you had your contact in Brazil, then your contact in Brazil should find out about the EU delegation in Brazil. They have an office in the capital city, in that case in Brasilia, and your contact in Brazil could, you know, ring them up or find their website and go online and find out what they're up to. Because many of these funding programs for help with these foreign countries outside the European Union, the money is devolved, and these European officers in those countries will have more knowledge about what's going on. There are calls for projects appearing on individual websites, and as I said earlier, opportunities for international projects are now a bit easier through the transnational funds generally. So the three programs. This is the first program, which is for pre-accession countries. In other words, those countries trying to join the EU, which is Turkey and the Balkan countries listed there. You'll see Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia. So those countries can get extra funding to help them get ready to be ready to join the European Union. And there have been some culture projects supported through this program. For example, supporting rural cultural tourism developments to help improve economic performance in rural areas. That's an example of a project that was funded there. There's a website there where you can get more information, but again, I would say make contact. If you want to do some work with Bosnia, then make contact with the EU office in Bosnia to see what the opportunities might be there. The neighborhood countries. These are the countries around the European Union that are less likely to join, but you know, there may be they want to develop better links with them. There are two categories, two groupings. Euromed is the countries of North Africa and the Middle East, and Euro-East is the former Soviet Union and Caucasus countries. And both of those strands, Euromed and Euro-East, have had support for cultural projects. One of the themes of Euromed has been culture and media, for example. Euro-East has a culture program going to 2015, but it's, as I said earlier, these countries are also starting to become eligible to participate in the transnational funding programs. And some of these have already become eligible. So, for example, I think it's Georgia and Moldova has become eligible to participate in the culture program, for example. So you may find it's easier to go through one of the transnational funds, the culture program, one of the others, if you want to sort of work with partners from one of these countries. And finally, there are links to other countries through the Europe Aid budget. Europe Aid does have a commitment to working on culture-based projects. You'll see that website there, which gives you information. Has a commitment to culture. It's run conferences on the role of culture in aid and development. They're particularly interested in the ACP countries, the African, Caribbean, Pacific countries. There's an ACP Cultures Plus website there. They've included a project, PAMCE, P-A-M-C-E, which turned out to be a performing arts touring subsidy scheme, helping performing arts companies from ACP countries come to Europe. And they run other projects from time to time. There is some support for projects in Asia and Latin America and North America. North America, they don't tend to subsidize culture projects because they feel USA and Canada can do that themselves. But there are opportunities for things like higher education exchanges and so on. But there are a couple of websites there that will provide you with some information. Okay, so that's the end of the first half. I've gone through that a bit quickly in order to make up for the few minutes we'd lost. We'll have a short break of 3 minutes just to sort of enable people to get a cup of coffee or anything else they want to do. I will go back to the main main page rather, so I can see if there are any questions. And then we'll start again in a couple of minutes on the basis of the transnational funds. So in the second half, as I said, we will look at the transnational funds. So I'll just wait here for a few moments to see if there are any questions or comments or emotional outbursts from anybody about what we have gone through so far. And then we'll start again in about 2 minutes. I'll have a sip of coffee in the meantime. Okay, so no questions. No questions. We will start again. Okay, right, we shall keep going then. I shall go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I hope you're all still with me. We're now going to go to the second half where we're going to talk about the transnational funds. So, transnational funds. Just to remind us, this is the middle group of programs, the transnational funds. These are some of the programs which we're going to mention briefly. COSME, LIFE, Horizon 2020, Europe for Citizens, Erasmus, and Creative Europe. Okay, now, before we look at the individual programs, just to remind you about what sorts of grants are offered by the transnational funds. There are two main types of grants offered by the transnational funds. Collaborative projects based on cooperation and partnership, partners from at least 3 different European countries, and these grants must be seen as project grants. And what I mean by that is that these grants cannot be seen to be used for anything that could be seen as annual revenue funding. It's the job of the member state to decide which arts organizations it wants to support on the basis of annual revenue grants. So these funds can only be for short-term project grants. Apart from projects, there are also potentially mobility grants, so very small grants, maybe around 1,500 euros for an individual to take part in a visit or exchange. Now, many of the transnational funds will provide support for projects and also for mobility, but not everyone. Okay, so for example, the culture program only supports projects. It doesn't provide individual mobility grants. Mobility will no doubt be a theme within the project grants, but it doesn't actually support individual mobility grants. But some programs support both. Erasmus Plus, for example, supports both projects and mobility. Wide range of themes and topics, links to Europe 2020, and for project grants, there will always be some element of match funding. So you don't need match funding for small-scale mobility grants, but you certainly do for project grants. So these are the programs I'm going to look at briefly. COSME, LIFE, Europe for Citizens, Horizon 2020, Education and Culture, which includes Erasmus and Creative Europe. You'll see the quite a diversity in the range of funding that's available. Europe for Citizens, very small, 203 million euros. Horizon 2020, it's a bit less than 80 billion now, but it's still 70 or 80 billion euros, so huge amounts of money. Okay. So the first one I'm just going to mention very briefly is COSME. COSME is support for small and medium enterprises, focused on competitiveness and SMEs. This is run by the DG for Enterprise, as you can see from the URL. It's ec.europa.eu, which is the European Commission, and then the DG Enterprise runs this particular program. Now, I put it up because there has been a lot of work done by the culture units within the European Commission to try and promote opportunities, particularly for the creative industries, from other EU funding programs. And they are trying to persuade, and I think they've been successful in persuading the COSME program to look at applications from the creative industries and from cultural organizations. So it includes loan guarantee facility, it includes help to access new markets, particularly in Europe, support for entrepreneurs, and so on. You can find more information about COSME by identifying and talking to the Enterprise Europe contact point, which is closest to you. If you look at that particular website at the bottom there, that will give you information about the Enterprise Europe contact points, and there'll be one close to you. There are about I think 8 or 10 across the UK, so you can find the relevant one there, and they will be able to give you more information about how you can find access to COSME, for example. Okay. LIFE Plus. Now, LIFE Plus is a program which is aimed at climate change and the environment, so providing support in a range of areas there. Now, obviously, the climate change and environmental activities may be relevant to some cultural organizations. All cultural organizations should be doing as much as they possibly can, obviously, to adapt their working practices to minimize their negative impacts on the climate. And some programs may be focusing particularly on this particular area. So the LIFE program might be relevant. One of the interesting points here, you'll see towards the bottom there, it says 80% of the funds have been devolved to the member states. Now, I mentioned that for most transnational funds, you apply centrally to Brussels, but there are one or two where they have devolved funding. Funding is considerable, and so the European Commission has decided that it's easier for them to give the money back to the individual member states and for the member states to allocate some of the funding. So here we have 80% devolved back to member states. There's a website there where you can find the individual contact points who may well have devolved funding. And then at the very bottom, you'll see the UK contact point is an organization called Beta Europe. So what you could do here is, in your own member state, approach the relevant contact point and just find out what the situation is about the devolved funding. In most cases, applying for the devolved funding is much easier than applying to Brussels. Rather than sending an application to Brussels, if you're only sending an application to an organization within your own country, where you can go and perhaps meet them or have discussions with them, that's often easier process than having to apply to Brussels. So anywhere where it says devolved funding, that's worthwhile looking at. So the LIFE program, if it's relevant in terms of the themes, might be easier to apply for than some of the other programs. Europe for Citizens. Now, Europe for Citizens program, as a general point, Europe for Citizens, the themes of Europe for Citizens are about aspects of or those aspects of Europe which relate to the interests and the needs and the engagement of the citizens. So how can we better engage the citizens of Europe in the fact that there is a European Union and that it will only work if the citizens are supportive and confident of what it's doing, have an interest in what it's trying to do, and so on and so forth. So there are various strands here which are about offering opportunities to projects which essentially bring citizens together, either just to have meetings or to undertake projects. So Europe for Citizens covers both mobility grants and project grants. And interestingly, Europe for Citizens is relatively easy to apply for, even though you have to apply to Brussels, because both the mobility grants and the project grants are all based on what is called lump sum funding. So the amount of money you can get for your project is simply based on certain characteristics of your project. You don't have to create a detailed budget. You just have to sort of indicate the sorts of activities your project is doing, the number of people involved, and so on and so forth, and there'll be a calculation as to how much money you can get. So the financial aspects of Europe for Citizens are much more straightforward than many other programs. Strand 1 is very specific about European remembrance. Now, this is a project strand that used to focus simply on what is in the second bullet point, the causes of totalitarian regimes in Europe's modern history, Nazism, the Holocaust, fascism, Stalinism, and so on. But it's been broadened. So projects can look at other defining moments and reference points in recent European history, as you can see from the next bullet point. Actions which encourage tolerance, understanding, intercultural dialogue. Again, it seems to me, in the light of what's happened in Paris in the last week, the European Commission would be very keen to support some innovative and imaginative projects which could well be organized by cultural organizations in the Europe for Citizens strand, and in this particular strand as well. So you'll see that, you know, any types of organizations, including cultural organizations, can apply for this strand 1. Strand 2 is about democratic engagement and civic participation. So that's bringing people together. There are 3 sub-strands here. The first and second sub-strand, town twinning and networks of towns, are essentially mobility grants. You simply get a bunch of mobility grants to bring people together. So town twinning, that has to be submitted by town twinning organizations or local authorities with twin towns. The network of towns has to be submitted by organizations involved in some sort of network, but you could actually go and set one of these up. You know, if you wanted to work with people from 1 or 2 other cities in different European countries, you could, you yourselves could just create an informal network, give it some sort of structure, and then apply for a grant through network of towns. And you could get some money to bring people together to explore issues that might be of interest to citizens in your town, citizens in the other towns, in terms of how you relate to the European Union, developments in the history of Europe, and so on and so forth. And then the final sub-strand is the civil society projects, which are about projects based on all these themes. So these are not limited to the sort of remembrance focus that was in strand 1. They could focus on all sorts of other examples. And if you come to the webinar on Europe for Citizens, I'll give you a number of different examples of projects that have been funded under these particular streams. That website at the bottom will give you access to the list of the different contact points for this program. Sadly, in the United Kingdom, there isn't a contact point for this program at this particular stage. But if you want extra advice, then we are trying to provide some extra advice via Euclid to help people make applications here. Okay, moving on to Horizon 2020. Before we move on, I'm just going to quickly pop back and make sure that everybody is still with me, and whether or not there are any other additional questions at this stage. Nope, no more questions. Either everybody has fallen asleep, which is perfectly possible, or else it's all blindingly clear or immensely complicated. Horizon 2020, talking of immensely complicated, here we go. Horizon 2020 is a huge program, 70 or 80 billion euros of funding. It covers research and innovation for the whole of the European Union in every conceivable area, whether that is medical research, scientific, engineering, anything at all. it's all in here. So it's a huge program. It succeeds the 7th framework program. It was originally going to be called the 8th framework program, but they decided that it was going to be Horizon 2020 was a much better name. There are 6 different parts to this program. The 2 that are most relevant to the broad cultural sector are number 2, industrial leadership, and number 3, societal challenges. And within these 2 areas, there are a number of sub-strands that are relevant to the cultural sector. For example, under strand 2, industrial leadership, there is a section on leadership in enabling industrial technologies, and this includes information and communication technologies, which includes the following strands. Now, you'll see that I've listed all the strands which have deadlines in 2014 or 2015. So just to give you an idea of the breadth of opportunities, we don't know what strands will be coming up for 2016, but you'll see that there are the couple of strands here, number 19 and number 20, technologies for creative industry, social media and convergence, technologies for better human learning and teaching. They have deadlines coming up in 2015. Societal challenges. Within societal challenges, there was a sub-strand called secure, clean and efficient energy. And this included, for example, last year, there was a deadline for energy strategies and solutions for deep renovation of historic buildings. So again, who knows what, there's no relevant strands as far as we can see in 2015, but there may be more in 2016. Oops, gone too far. Okay. Then also under this strand here, there is reflective societies, cultural heritage and European identities. And you'll see there's, 11 strands, I think, here, some of which were 2014 deadlines, some of which were 2015 deadlines. So number 2, emergence and transmission of European cultural heritage and Europeanization. Number 3, European cohesion, regional and urban policies, and so on and so forth. You can read all those. So numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 11 all have deadlines coming up in 2015. And there'll be more information about each of those individual programs in the Horizon 2020 webinar, which is on next week. Horizon 2020 is not easy to apply for, but it may be relevant to some organizations. It might be more relevant to consortium of organizations, which may include some larger and some smaller organizations. It's obviously relevant to university departments and research institutes as well. There's the basic information of the way you can find out information on how to participate. There is a website there which provides links to the various contact points in the different eligible countries. There are masses and masses of contact points. This is a huge program, so there are contact points for all the individual strands. So, for example, that's the main website for UK, but then there'll be an NCP, which is the national contact point for the Reflective Society strand, for the energy strand, for the ICT strand, and so on and so forth. So lots of different contact points there. You can send them information and ask them questions, and they should be able to help you. There is also Europeana, which is the European database of Europe's cultural heritage, which is doing some interesting work, and there may be opportunities for funding of projects through Europeana, or if you're involved in the museums and heritage sector, it may be you want to link in with Europeana to make sure that, find somewhere which, your museum's objects or collections can be included within the Europeana European database. Okay, so moving on to Erasmus+. Now, Erasmus+ is the new name for the merged program, previously Lifelong Learning Program, and also the Youth Program. Lifelong Learning covered education and training. Youth obviously covered young people. These have all been merged under Erasmus+. Now, Erasmus+, to some people, appears complicated. I think it appears complicated because of scale. It's a very large program and covers an awful lot. But actually, it's quite simple. There are only 2 strands you really need to worry about. There is the mobility strand, Key Action 1, mobility, which is about individual mobility grants. And there is Key Action 2, which is project grants. They call them strategic partnerships, but essentially it's the same as projects. So Key Action 1, mobility, and Key Action 2, partnerships. And then within either Key Action 1, mobility, or Key Action 2, partnerships, you apply within one of the education, training, or youth areas listed at the top. So you'd apply either as a school or a vocational project or a higher education project or an adult education project, or you'd apply as a youth project, or you'd apply as a sports project. So either mobility or partnerships within one of those other strands. Now the key thing, you'll see there a budget of 15.2 billion, but the key thing is that magic word in the bottom right, decentralized. So this is the other program, which means that the money is not all handed out in Brussels, it's handed out in the member states. So the contact point in each member state has been given a large chunk of the budget and is being asked to spend that money on projects within that particular country. Now those projects will need partners in other countries, but the lead partner, whichever country they are based in, they can apply to the contact point in their own country for the money for that particular activity. Now that's really, really important. I cannot stress enough how important that is, because applying for the devolved transnational funds is the easiest route into European funding. Devolved transnational funds are the easiest route in. Okay, bottom point here, small point about organisation. You have to be an organisation. Even if you're applying for an individual mobility grant, you can't apply as yourself. You have to, the application would have to go in through an organisation who would then receive the money and then manage that money on your behalf. Okay, so they give money to you if they want to, but the money has to be paid to an organisation. It can't be paid to an individual. The other bottom point is also worth noting that although I say that there is a Key Action 1 mobility, Key Action 2 projects, there's a sort of middle ground here, because actually you can apply for lots of mobility grants. So you can go to Key Action 1 and apply for 5 or 10 or even more mobility grants. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're creating a project by applying for lots of mobility grants. I mean, we did this a few years ago ourselves at Euclid. We wanted to run some cultural fundraising workshops in different European countries. And what we did to pay for those was we simply applied, each of the partners applied in their own member state for 15 mobility grants. And we used those to send 5 people from our country to each of the 3 other workshops. And that was replicated in each of the other countries. So that's how we funded the entire thing. And because mobility grants are based on lump sum funding as well, it means there's flexibility in the way in which you can spend the money. So we were able to pay for all the costs of running our workshop and sending people to the other workshops in the other countries just through the mobility grants that we receive for people in our own country. Again, I'll explain this more in the Erasmus webinar. Within the Erasmus program, it also covers young people. And so what it's looking at there is, promoting young people's social inclusion and well-being. We're open to a wide range of youth organizations. Now, as I said, you can only be an organization, but in terms of young people, they will allow the grants to be given to slightly less formal, informal groups of young people can apply, but there has to be some sort of organization in some form for you to make an application. Also for sport, there is a limited number of grants and opportunities for sports-based activity that also comes within the Erasmus umbrella, but I'm not going to say much more about that. So here we go, Key Action 1, decentralized activities. There are some centralized activities where you do apply to Brussels. You'll see those are listed at the bottom of this slide, and I don't think they're relevant to most cultural organizations. So decentralized, for any, it says here for the UK, run by the UK contact point, but that's the same. If they're in the Netherlands, they're run by the Netherlands contact point. If it's in Greece, they're run by the Greek contact point, and so on and so forth. So you can apply under Key Action 1 for mobility for higher education students, vocational learners, school staff, adult education staff, and young people and youth workers. Okay, I've highlighted adult education because I think that unless you're working with young people, then the adult education route is the most appropriate route for most cultural organizations. Okay. And that's key action 1, and then there's key action 2. Key action 2 is projects, and again, it's much the same. Decentralized activities, you apply to the contact point in your own country. Centralized, you apply to Brussels, but again, I don't think the centralized activities are relevant to most cultural organizations. So if you want a strategic partnership, in other words, a project, you apply in whichever one of those strands that fits most: higher education, vocational education, schools, adult education, young people, or it may be cross more than one field. So there are actually 3 strands. I mean, there is a 3rd strand, support for policy reform, but I don't think that's relevant to the cultural sector, so I've not talked about that. Learning mobility and innovation exchange of good practices, which is projects. Opportunities under sport and Jean Monnet. Don't worry about Jean Monnet. That's a list of all the national contact points, and that's a list of the contact point in the UK where you can find more information. Now, there'll be a lot more detail about this program in the relevant webinar, which is coming up next week as well. And so finally, I'm just going to take 10 minutes or so to look at Creative Europe. But before I do, I'm just going to check back one more time to see if there are any questions that have come up that I may have missed. Any questions? No questions? No? Oh, goodness, I hope people are still awake. It'd be really depressing if they're not. Right, let me just get back to the slide. Okay. So moving swiftly on, we're going to look at Creative Europe. Now, Creative Europe is the program that is obviously specifically aimed at the cultural and creative sectors. Creative Europe is actually an umbrella name. There's no Creative Europe program as such. What there is the culture program and the media program. So those 2 programs have been brought together under the umbrella title of Creative Europe. So depending on the program or the project you're developing, you'll apply either for the culture program or for the media program. There will also be a new financial facility which will support bank loans to the sector, and that will come on stream in 2016. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So you can see the overall budget, 1.5 billion euros, over half to the media program, a third to the culture program, and the remainder to the financial facility. And as I was hinting earlier on, there's a shift from the sort of general overarching goals about citizenship and we'll support nice arts projects because we like the arts, to projects which are going to help address the key priorities that have been set by the European Union and reflected in documents such as Europe 2020. In other words, helping unlock job creation potential of the creative sectors, capacity building, digital agenda, innovation, all those sorts of themes are now really quite important. One key point, the cultural and creative sector's definition is now extremely broad. I mean, once upon a time, 15 years ago, they would seem to be very narrow. You know, they were focusing on opera and orchestral music and opera houses and fine art museums and so on. Well, these days, it's much broader. You'll see at the top bullet point, all sectors whose activities are based on cultural values and or artistic and other creative expressions. And this goes on to say whether these activities are market or non-market oriented. So that actually means that you can have commercial profit-making organizations as partners in your project if you wanted to. Now that might be useful given the fact that the new priorities reflect a broader understanding of culture and creative industries and so on. Obviously your projects can't make a profit, but you may wish to have a profit-making organization as one of your partners. Whatever the type of structure carries them out, irrespective of how it's financed, covers the whole of the value chain, so development, creation, production, dissemination, preservation, and so on and so forth. And then you'll see a listing of the sectors. That's not meant to be exhaustive, but you can see it really does cover the broadest possible range of sectors. The only caveat is if you're applying to the culture program, you can't apply with a project focused only on the audiovisual sector. There is a media program which covers the audiovisual sector. So if you're applying for the culture program, you might have part of your project being focused on audiovisual, you couldn't make it the focus of your entire project. This is the financial facility. This will be starting in 2016. Essentially, this will be this aims to help people in the cultural sector and the creative industries make it easier for them to get a bank loan for their work. I mean, if you try and get a bank loan and you're a cultural organisation, the banks will usually say no because they don't believe that you have the assets or the collateral that bank loans require. And this is designed that you can apply first to the Commission and get a guarantee from them, which you can then take to your bank in order to guarantee the loan you'll apply for from Barclays or HSBC, wherever it might be. This has taken a while to get up and running. It's obviously quite complicated to sort of work this through, but hopefully it'll come on stream in 2016. A media program. Now, the media program supports the audiovisual industries. It's film, TV, and video games. That's essentially what it supports. And it's about creating a successful audiovisual industry in Europe, across the whole of Europe. It doesn't actually fund the production of films or TV shows or whatever. It tends to fund, I mean, there's one exception to that, but most of the funding is for either end. So it supports the development costs and the training of people to work in the sector. So, and script development. And then it funds the other end. So once your film is made, it funds support for the dissemination of your film, either through the support for work on new platforms for disseminating film, or support for film festivals, or for marketing, things like that. Okay, so you can see here this list of what it does: capacity building and professional training, development of projects, distribution and sales, film festivals. It does now fund some international co-production. The key word is international. So it won't fund European co-production. You need to have some sort of international partner involved in the co-production. And finally, also new, is the phrase audience development. So it's very key. And audience development is a key phrase that applies across the whole of the Creative Europe programme. It's even more important in the culture programme. They're very, very keen to see audience development issues addressed in their project grants and so on within the Creative Europe programme. So within the media program, there are a whole range of different strands you can apply for. Most of these will give quite small grants. Obviously, the international co-production will give these larger grants, but there'll be small grants for audience development projects, for cinema networks, film festivals, distribution, producer support, training, and so on. So you can see all of that there. And there are one or two deadlines each year for these different strands. There is a Creative Europe desk for the Creative Europe programme. In most countries, what has happened is that within the Creative Europe desk, there are actually two contact points, one for the media programme and one for the culture programme. So the contact point for the media programme in the UK is the BFI, the British Film Institute, and those are there. That's their website and email address. There are also separate contacts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, as there are in most of the bigger EU member states as well. But if you're not in the UK, then you can go to that website and find the Creative Europe desk from that particular website. Culture programme then. Okay, so let's spend the last 5 minutes looking at the culture programme. There are only 3 objectives now for the culture programme, and these are they. Support the capacity of the sectors to operate transnationally and internationally, promote the circulation of works, and the mobility of players. Now, the circulation of works and the mobility of players are old family favourites. Those objectives have been there forever, and they're really important. So these are transnational, circulation of works, mobility of players. The second bullet point is our old friend audience development that I said was really important. Helping people reach new audiences, improving access, particular focus on certain groups, new and innovative ways with audiences, retaining and enlarging, and so on and so forth. Read all that. And then finally, innovation and creativity. Well, that's good to see. Artistic innovation, testing of new business models, use of digital technologies, and the promotion of innovative spillovers on other sectors. Now, that's quite interesting. Innovative spillovers in other sectors is ways in which you may be able to demonstrate that your cultural project has an impact on some of the big picture challenges that are reflected in Europe 2020 agenda. So, for example, if you're doing a theatre project working with disadvantaged young people on, deprived housing estates on the outskirts of Manchester or Amsterdam, wherever it happens to be, and you can demonstrate that the involvement of these young people has meant that they have gained new skills, or just even confidence about presenting themselves in job interviews, and a greater capacity therefore to maybe get a job in the future, then what you can say is that your cultural project is contributing to Europe 2020 by helping young people find work. So any way in which you can build a link between your cultural project and the big picture Europe 2020 objectives might be useful. Apart from the objectives, there are then 6 priorities, and any culture project has to address at least one of these 6 priorities, maybe 1 or 2. Don't get carried away. Nobody expects any cultural project to address more than 2 or 3 of these, because the funding is not all that great. You don't have to deliver everything. So these are the 6 priorities. Providing people with skills, competences, and know-how, that helps them adapt to digital technologies and so on. The second one is internationalizing careers and activities. And the third one is access to professional opportunities. The fourth one is supporting cultural activities, exhibitions, exchanges, festivals, performances. That's quite straightforward. The fifth one is about literature. There's always one about literature, because literature is always underfunded, under-resourced. And the final one is virtually the audience development objective rewritten. So audience development is obviously one of the main priorities. So your project has to address, as I said, 1 or 2 of those priorities. Oops, sorry. The key strand within the culture program you need to worry about, I would think in most cases, is going to be the project strand. I'll explain the new project strand on the next slide, but that's the most important. There is also a strand for literary translation, support for translation of works of fiction, and there is a strand for platforms, and I'll say something about that as well, and also for European cultural networks. But for most cultural organizations from an individual member state, it's the project strand which is the most important. So in terms of projects then, there are 2 sub-strands here, small projects and large projects. Small projects, project leader plus 2 or more co-organizers, so 3 partners from 3 different countries. Large projects, you need 6 partners from 6 different countries. So a project leader and 5 co-organizers. Small projects, you can get no more than 200,000 euros for the project, and large projects, you can get no more than 2 million. Now that's great. The large projects, you can get 2 million euros, but you'll see that it's a 50-50. So there's 50% match funding. So although you can get 2 million euros, you have to find the match of 2 million euros as well, which may be quite a challenge. For the small projects, you'll see that 200,000 represents 60% of the project. So you have to then find another 160,000 euros between yourself and the lead organizer and the various co-organizers. The project leader, one of the partners, must have its legal seat in one of the key countries. That's very straightforward. Maximum duration is now 4 years, so either small or large projects run for 4 years. If it's a small project, we recommend it doesn't run for more than 3 years. And you can add associate partners, and I'll say a bit more about associate partners in a second. Where do partners come from? 28 member states, so all the member states obviously can be based there, your partner organization is based there. Other countries can also participate if they signed an agreement to do so. Norway and Iceland have signed those agreements. Some of the accession countries, in other words, the countries of Turkey and the Balkans, have signed those agreements. And as I said earlier, the neighborhood countries are now starting to sign these agreements as well. So Georgia and Moldova have signed agreements. So all these countries can participate. And of course, once you have your 3 partners from the official eligible countries, or the 6 partners if it's a large project, you can also have associate partners from anywhere in the world. So this is another way in which, if you've got this fantastic organization in Brazil you've always wanted to work with, well, you can work with them as an associate partner, and you can spend up to 30% of your budget on associate partners. Okay, so 30% could be spent on the involvement of the Brazilians, either bringing the Brazilians to Europe to participate in the project, or you could even go and do a bit of the project in Brazil. Whichever way, it can be no more than 30% of the budget. Okay, applications then. The next call will be in 2015, in October. The announcement will be in July, when the official application forms will be online. The deadline is first Wednesday in October. You'll be informed the following March, so you'll be informed in March 2016. And when you put your application in, you'll choose a start date of between May and December of the year after the deadline. So that would be May to December 2016. Choose whichever start date you want, and then add up to 4 years to get your end date. So, I mean, if we're talking now about October 2015 deadline, then, you know, your start date might be, let's say, the 1st of September 2016. And so your end date could be the end of August 2020. So this could be quite a long way in the future, rather. You don't have to run your project for 4 years, but if you do, then we are talking, medium to long-term planning here. Okay, so the previous website listing listed all the Creative Europe desks. In the UK, the Culture Programme desk, the contact point, is the British Council, and that's their new website and their email address. And again, there are separate contacts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. That's the end of the overview. I hope it's been of some use. We run an EU Arts Funding Twitter feed. Do sign up for that. Do consider the various opportunities under the different programs I've gone through. Decide how ready you are, which deadline is right for you. At the end of the day, they're looking for really good ideas and strong, secure partners. That's what they're really looking for. So the ideas and the partnerships are absolutely crucial. And this will be reinforced in the individual webinars that I'm going to go through, starting on Friday and running next week as well. Euclid, we run, as I said, the Twitter feed. We run the seminars and webinars. We have various services as well to help you, help with the preparation of your application if you need it. And if you're a member, if you're a Connexus member, there are various downloads and other benefits that you can receive. That's it. Thank you very much. That's my email, but you will all probably have an email from me as well, so you'll have all that. I'll see you at the next, or see many of you at the next webinar. I hope that's been useful. I'm now going to go back and have a look at the chat to see if anybody has asked me any more questions. No more questions, right? I will hang on for a couple of moments in case anybody has any questions, but you can also send me an email if you have specific questions. So if you have any specific questions, then please do send me an email to ask those questions. But I'm just going to wait here, looking a bit silly, for a few more moments in case anybody does have any specific questions.